This is a talk about awake relationships, particularly romantic relationships. So, I have been married twice. My first marriage was went for about 20 years. We were together, and half of that time I was going through the awakening process. And awakening was certainly a factor in why that relationship ended. It was completely necessary for it to end, for my continual progression through awakening. It just had to happen. It's so obvious now. It was a key way that the identity structure had formed and was maintaining itself here. So this is not going to be the case for everyone, but it can be quite common, particularly more so with women. There's this collective conditioning that I need a partner, that I need to be married, that I can't be independent, I need to depend on another. And that was all very unconscious. I wouldn't have known that was there. But through awakening, step by step, gradually illuminating to me that that relationship had to end. What happened is that when we separated, the identity structure here just completely collapsed. And within, I'm guessing, about 3 years from that moment, permanent awakening, abiding awakening had happened. So there still was a lot of unraveling and healing to go, but it was the thing that it was like a pin in the identity structure had been pulled out, and it just allowed everything to start to actually collapse. And with that, my entire life changed. I lost basically everything. Everything changed. But I was very devoted to awakening and to truth by that point. So it wasn't too scary. It wasn't too intimidating, although it was challenging. So that's where all this began. I largely had an identity to do with being a partner, to do with being married, and what it meant to be female and those types of things. So to have none of that there anymore, and to be single for the first time in my life since I was a teenager, it was exactly what was being needed for awakening, to be alone, to be independent and self-sufficient in every possible way. It was really perfect for awakening. Then I was single for about 5 or 6 years as I was completing that part of the awakening process, became awake, and stayed single. I was dating for the first few years. While I was going through the awakening process, still had a very strong drive because of that identity structure to couple up, to need to be in a relationship, coming from a wounded place, from a traumatized place, from a place of an attachment wound and narcissistic parents. And it was wounded. The energy was needy. It wanted to attach to someone. And so through dating, I got to see where my healing in this regard, to do with the parental wounds, the attachment wound, where it was up to. And so I used this as I used dating as a way to see how well the healing was going. So at the same time, I was doing very immense healing every single day, doing therapy, very deep work on healing the attachment wound and all the other trauma. And I was changing very quickly. And with that, the people that I would attract when I was dating, they would change, and I would attract different types of people. So it was a very interesting experiment. It was dangerous at times. It's not something I would recommend to do, but this was just a part of my path. And in that, I could see the progress that I was having with the healing work that I was doing, particularly on the attachment wound. I'm not an attachment specialist, so I'll link to someone that talks about the attachment wound in the description for you if you want to learn more about that. So, and then once I had been dating and using that as part of my awakening, really as a spiritual practice, then the permanent shift into unity consciousness happened. And then I decided I wanted to stay single and was not interested in having a partner ever again, which was interesting and just shows you how much of the identity was just not there anymore. I had no interest in ever being with anyone ever again. And then it stayed like that for a couple of years, no dating, no interest in it. And until I just accidentally, spontaneously came across my current husband, and then it all just happened, and we got married, fell in love, and all the usual. And so now I'm happily married. And so I have had a relationship, my previous one, where it had dysfunction, but it wasn't all bad. And I went through the awakening process, and it was extremely beneficial for awakening to have that illumination and that mirroring. That's exactly what I needed at that time. I really needed that relationship. And so I'm very grateful for that. And then I needed that time on my own, as much time on my own as possible, while I was completing that awakening process and feeling what it was like to be completely alone. That was extremely important. Plus, seeing through the dating how I was going with the healing and how much more work needed to be done. And then it seemed that once the healing work had been completed and I was abiding in unity consciousness for a couple of years, then life basically lined up this partner that is exactly perfect for me, for where I'm at with awakening and for what I need. And so this relationship is extremely different. It really is what I would call more of an awake relationship. And I'm going to talk more about that today. This relationship is very different to my last one. There was love in both, but that one was really about illumination, the past one, and my awakening process and trying to break the illusory self. And now that that process is complete, this relationship is really just about pleasure and enjoying each other's company, all the perks of relationship without all the triggering and the challenges. So there's still challenges as far as life events. There's children involved and the things that happen with children and decisions that need to be made and money issues and all of that sort of stuff obviously just remains the same and is worked through. What's different, however, so my husband is going through an awakening and I'm in unity consciousness. And with that specific dynamic, it works very well for us. It's a very harmonious and happy relationship. And it is largely because there is not much triggering going on. So I rarely get triggered. And so when I asked my husband what's his favorite part of the relationship for this video, he said that I don't get triggered. And so it gives him a space to feel like he can be himself, that he's not scared of what I might think or say, or go into a controlling mode or anything like that. He doesn't feel anxious. And so it allows him to just be himself and be real and be truthful without any consequences, which you might receive from a partner that isn't awake because of their conditioning and their wounding being triggered. And so that is what he said that he enjoys the most. And so it's not perfect, of course. I'm not saying it is. I'm just trying to explain what an awake relationship can look like, or at least what it looks like for me. So it looks like a relationship that's based in truth and honesty and just reality, and being real with each other is really the key part to the relationship. Then there is just a lot of very simple joy. It's not the same as in a sleep relationship where there's these highs and these lows and more like big excitement, ups and downs, and very dramatic, we're going to leave each other, and then like hanging on and then reconnecting, and that can be a lot more highs and lows in a sleep relationship, which can make it seem more exciting and dramatic. There's none of that. It's very even and consistently pleasurable. So it just sort of is more along like this. Yes, we have our challenges, we might have disagreements, all of that is totally possible, but it's a much more neutral kind of feeling and feeling of contentedness ongoing. So it is a lot less challenging for sure without the triggering going on. Of course, one of us could always get triggered, but truth is the priority in the relationship, and that just happens naturally. It's not something that's conscious. It just wants to be illuminated. It wants to be spoken about. And I'm not talking about the truth of reality, just being truthful, being honest, saying how we really feel, saying if something's bothering us, not hiding anything, not keeping anything to ourselves, being free to just express ourselves without consequences and to feel authentic in doing that. So that's very liberating to live like that in a relationship. It is freedom within the relationship. So there's no feeling of dependency there. There is love there. There would be sadness if it ended, certainly, but there's no feeling of like this sticky attachment dependency that was there in my previous relationship. So there doesn't seem any capacity or ability to attach in that way in unity, or at least in my experience. So with whatever it is that I'm doing. And so that creates this relationship of love, but non-attachment. And so you love each other and you want what's best for the other person. And if that meant separating, of course you'd be sad, but you love them, and there's not that stickiness and desperation, that neediness, that's not there. And so that gives you the freedom to see things clearly, and give them space and do the right thing by each other. So that all happens naturally because there isn't that stickiness, that dependency there. Everything else just falls into place. So it's not like you have to consciously work hard at it being healthy. It's just naturally healthy and balanced and loving, and just goes easily and smoothly. And will it be like this forever? I don't know. I have no idea what will happen. There is the truth that you know that it will end eventually, and you live with that truth. And that's true for everybody. Every relationship ends. Either one person dies, or you separate, or something bad happens. There's always an ending to everything that's in form. And you live with that truth because you live with the truth. You're honest about that this could end at any moment. And so I'm going to enjoy it as much as I can while it is here, for as long as I can. And there's liberation in that as well. So it's actually a relationship that, instead of feeling trapped or imprisoned or dependent or like you can't get out, it's one of liberation. So it feels as freeing as being single, which I very much enjoyed being alone and could happily do it again and go down that path. But it's almost like that same feeling of freedom and liberation, but also getting the bonus of being with someone, connecting with someone, doing silly things together, being playful, and having this relationship be so easy in just day to day. It doesn't have the complications that come with bringing your wounding to a relationship. It just makes everything more enjoyable. And it also helps me to see just how wounded and damaged I was in the first relationship by comparison. So my wounding, my trauma made me in relationship to be controlling, dependent, miserable and needy and really not able to be strong and fend for myself. That's how it manifested, my particular trauma in relationship. And also I felt angry and resentful that I couldn't be stronger. I wanted to be stronger. I wanted to be more independent, but I was annoyed that I couldn't find my way to that until I started healing. Where now having an awake relationship, it is really being independent, completely independent and self-sufficient and self-reliant in every possible way. You do not need the other person for anything. You know how to be completely self-sufficient in the world, which is why it's helpful to have a period of time where you've had to test that out and actually see, can you look after yourself, including your emotional needs? Can you be completely independent in the world? And so because I practiced that for those 5 or 6 years, I learned how to do that. And then I could remain like that in the relationship. And what that did is it makes it the dynamic cleaner. It makes you're not needing things from each other. It doesn't go into some murky kind of territory from childhood wounds there, because there isn't any kind of energy for attaching or dependency. You look after, each person looks after themselves. You're able to ask for help if you want to, but you're not dependent on the other person. So it's this sweet spot of relationship. It's like you get the benefits of the relationship without the challenges of being in relationship. And it's because the wounding isn't there, the parental wounds aren't there being triggered and projected. What is said is heard clearly. There's no projection of what your mother or father said to you in the past and distorting the words that are said. Things can be heard clearly and addressed quickly because of that. So if an issue does arise, the truth of it can be expressed, it can be worked through very quickly and let go of very quickly, and you just move on to the next thing. So all of that past baggage to do with our parental wounds and our childhood and all of that really complicates romantic relationship. It really makes it so much harder than it needs to be and takes a lot of the pleasure out of it. And so to not be able to do those things that I did in relationship, in the past relationship, in this one was a little weird at first. It certainly was. It took me about a year to get used to not being able to function in the same way that I had in previous relationships, because you have a certain way that you do things in life, including dating and being in relationships, and all of that functioning wasn't there anymore. I couldn't do anything to try to impress him or gain his approval or change, wear a mask or try to be sexy or any of those strategies that I had previously used, try to be charming, try to be funny. None of that worked. All he could see is the awake version, and he either liked it or he didn't. And that was it. And luckily he did. But there was no ability to change how I was in any moment. It was what it was, and he either liked it or he didn't. And that was very different to how I was operating in the past. I was more like a shapeshifter, a chameleon, changing and becoming the person that I thought the man wanted me to be. That was a part of my identity structure, to do that. And I couldn't operate in that way. So it was a little strange. It felt a little strange, perhaps, in the first year to not be able to do that. But there was no angst around it because of being awake. There was just a matter of factness. Or he can either accept this, being with someone that's awake, which has its perks, but it also has its challenges. It can be challenging to be around someone that's awake all the time. And he either wants us to be with that, and I want to be with him for who he is, or we don't. It's that simple. There was no fantasizing about who I wanted him to be, and then thinking in the future he's the person that I want to be if he does X, Y, and Z, which is another strategy that we can use. And that romanticizing and daydreaming about who they can become, if only. It was just very real of who he is and being in love with that man on a relative level. There's the man and the woman, or whatever gender, but man and woman in my case, that was falling in love. The human body is falling in love and being attracted to each other, but without all the baggage, without all the conditioning. So it was very simple and beautiful and peaceful. But it was unusual because I'd never been through that before in that way. I'd been through it in a wounded way before, in a way of wearing masks and feeling like could control it. But this felt very out of control. Felt like it was just happening spontaneously. But there was a complete surrender to the process, just to see where it took me, what happened. And so it was actually really lovely in the end, even though it was a little strange at the beginning. And so my favorite part of this relationship, I guess, would be that I get to be myself, which myself is emptiness. I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to pretend to be asleep. I don't have to pretend to be anything that I'm not. I get to completely embody the truth of being awake and live it every single moment of the day. I don't have to pretend in a job that I'm not the way that I am, or in a relationship. I get to be real 100%, which I was living the opposite before I woke up. So I was living just in authenticity without even realizing it, without even knowing who I was. I was just changing masks continually, just trying to be everything that I thought other people wanted me to be. And in that, I had no idea who I was. And I was just felt like playing roles, playing characters, endlessly different ones, very lost. But also very much in pain that I felt like people didn't love me or couldn't see me for who I was, and that I had to play those games. And so that was a big pain point for me as well, even though I didn't know who I was. So to feel like I can just live an awake life and be myself, as in awareness, be that fully, completely, 100% of the time. For me, that is the best part of an awake relationship, because when you're in this part of unity, you can't pretend, you can't create a mask, you can't lie, and you're not capable. You would rather be alone if you had to do that. It would be so much easier to be alone. And so finding a partner that can be around that and that actually values that and enjoys that level of honesty and truth, it's not for everyone. It's certainly wouldn't be. But luckily, he appreciates that. And so we both get to be who we truly are and where we're at with awakening. There's no desire for anyone to be any different than where they're at and who they are. And that's such a relief to be in relationship in that way. And by no means am I an expert on relationships or have all the answers to do with relationships. I certainly don't. I am just speaking from my direct experience of having two marriages, one where I was going through the awakening process, one where it was all about illumination and mirroring and challenges to do with that. And then now one where it's really just about peace and just being awake and getting to live awake but being in relationship, and it's just like night and day. It's so different. It's a relationship based in truth. It's not particularly spiritual in any way. It's just about truth and being real and being authentic and expressing oneself when you want to, and so it's just liberating. It's really liberating. We're both probably a work in progress still, but I just thought perhaps you would find it interesting, my take on awake relationships.